It's 1775. The Second Continental Congress needs money to fight a war against the British Empire. They had no access to sufficient gold or silver, and no effective power to tax fast enough, so they print it. In the next 90 seconds, you'll learn the 3 signals that paper confidence is slipping and how to protect everyday buying power when it does. Millions of dollars backed by nothing but faith. That currency began a collapse that would make it worthless. You might be thinking, that's just old history, why does it matter? Because what happened to that currency in 1775 is a pattern that is happening to your purchasing power right now. To understand what's happening to your wallet today, we have to go back to America's first inflation scam. And to understand that scam, we must first understand the powder keg money in colonial America was already a chaotic mess. There was no single American currency. There were British pounds, Spanish silver dollars, the famed pieces of 8 and French louis. Most colonies from Massachusetts to Virginia had been printing their own paper money called colonial scrip for decades. They printed it to pay for local projects or to fight in wars against the French and Native Americans. This scrip was a constant source of friction with London Parliament passed the Currency Acts in 1751 and 1764. These laws strictly limited, and in some cases forbade the colonies from issuing their own paper money. Britain wanted the colonies to pay their debts in hard coin gold and silver specie. This was a massive problem the colonies had. A severe chronic shortage of specie. Britain's mercantilist policies were designed to suck all the gold and silver out of the colonies and into the vaults of London. This is the situation the founders faced in 1775. A superpower enemy, no money, and a legal ban on the one tool they had. It was an impossible situation. The Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia's State House, had a $66 million problem. That was the estimated cost for the first year of war. It was an astronomical sum. The debate was fierce on one side. Men like John Adams argued for sound finance. They pushed Congress to borrow the money the old-fashioned way. But who would lend money to this rebel government? A government that might not exist in 6 months. On the other side, delegates like Benjamin Franklin argued for paper. Franklin had been a vocal supporter of colonial scrip in Pennsylvania. He argued that paper issued by the government was a necessary tool to mobilize the economy for war. It was, as he saw it, a public good. This time the paper advocates won. They weren't just printing money. They were printing bills of credit. This was a subtle but important legal distinction. These bills were essentially IOUs from the entire continent. They were a loan borrowed from the people to be paid back later once America won the war. Congress promised the states would eventually collect taxes to redeem these bills, to take them back out of circulation. It was a promise entirely dependent on military victory. On June 22, 1775, Congress authorized the very first issue. They printed $2 million in bills. These were not crude scraps of paper. They were intricately designed. The printer hall and cellars of Philadelphia used Franklin's own anti-counterfeiting method. Unique complex patterns of leaves on the bills. This same design language, including the Fugio I Fly motto and Mind a Business warning, would later appear on 1776. Continental coinage and the 1787 Fugio cent. These notes were not backed by gold. They were not backed by silver. They were backed only by the faith and credit of the United Colonies, a risky proposition for a nation that didn't even exist yet. Initially, the gamble seemed to pay off. The Continental Dollar held its value reasonably well through 1775 and early 1776. Patriotism encouraged acceptance. A merchant who refused to take the Continental was seen as a loyalist, a Tory. In some towns, people who rejected the currency were publicly shamed or even tarred and feathered. Soldiers in the new Continental Army were paid in this paper. Farmers sold their wheat and beef to the army for it. The war machine was funding itself. The war, however, intensified. The failed invasion of Canada in the winter of 1775 to 76 was a costly disaster. Washington's army was pushed out of Boston, then faced a massive British fleet at New York. The war was not ending in 1 year, it was expanding. and the cost of war was expanding with it. Congress had to keep printing. In 1775, they printed $6 million. In 1776, they printed another $19 million. By December 1776, as Washington's army fled across New Jersey, Congress had authorized $25 million in Continentals. The faith backing the currency was beginning to crack, and then the British provided a hammer. The British understood the power of financial warfare. They knew this entire rebellion was floating on a sea of paper. Their strategy: drown it. They began counterfeiting the Continental Dollar on an industrial scale. This wasn't random forgery, it was official state-sponsored British military policy. Contemporary accounts describe large-scale operations run from British held New York, even using presses on warships like the HMS Phoenix. The exact volume of forgeries is disputed, but what matters is that the flood of fakes materially accelerated the collapse in confidence. They weren't fighting with guns alone, they were waging war on confidence itself, and it worked. The counterfeit flood, combined with a third deadly factor: supply shocks. The British Royal Navy blockaded American ports. Imports of manufactured goods, textiles, salt, and tools dried up. Simultaneously, the Continental Army was taking tens of thousands of farmers and artisans out of the economy. There were fewer people making things, and there was less to buy. You had a triple curse. One, Congress was printing millions of real bills, to the British were printing millions of fake bills. 3. The supply of goods to buy was shrinking. Less goods chasing more money always equals inflation. Economic historians note that by early 1777, the first signs of serious trouble emerged. A Continental dollar, once trading at par with a silver dollar, began to slip. Its purchasing power dropped to 90 cents on the silver dollar. Congress and the individual states panicked. They did what all governments do when their currency fails. They blamed the people. They accused merchants of hoarding and price gouging. They accused farmers of disloyalty. They decided to fight economics with laws. Congress asked states to enact price controls. In late 1776 and early 1777, conventions were held across New England, and the Mid-Atlantic state representatives gathered to fix the prices of essential goods. A bushel of wheat would be fixed at 7 shillings, a pair of shoes at 10 shillings, a day's labor at 8 shillings. These price controls were a catastrophic failure. They were completely, totally ineffective. When administered prices are set below market clearing, prices goods vanish. Enforcement can't manufacture trust. A farmer knew it cost him more to grow the wheat than the 7 shillings the government offered. He knew the Continental paper he received was worth less every single day, so the farmers refused to sell their produce for depreciating paper. They hoarded goods waiting for hard currency. Or they sold their goods on the black market to the British, who paid in gold. The price controls didn't stop inflation, they created shortages. They emptied the markets, they broke the supply chains, and that failure led directly to the darkest moment of the war, which brings us to the brutal winter of 1777 at Valley Forge. We remember Valley Forge for the snow, the hunger, and the suffering. But we forget why the soldiers starved. It was not a winter of famine. The farms of Pennsylvania were full, the barns were overflowing with grain. The army starved because the supply system had collapsed, and it collapsed because of inflation. Farmers refused to sell their food to the Continental Army for worthless paper. The quartermaster's corps had nothing to offer but worthless paper. The soldiers, freezing in their huts, were living through the endgame of their own government's financial policy. Now imagine you are a 19-year-old soldier. You signed up to fight for independence. The government promised to pay you in Continental dollars, but Congress kept printing. By that winter, your monthly wages couldn't even buy a single pair of shoes. You watch men freeze to death, their feet wrapped in bloody rags, not because supplies don't exist, but because the very money the government paid you with had become worthless in your hands. This wasn't just hardship. It was a betrayal. It was a crisis of faith in the government you were fighting for. If you think that betrayal still echoes today, hit that subscribe button, because the story only gets more intense. The supply system had collapsed. Congress was in a death spiral. To get supplies they had to print more money, but printing more money made the money worth less, which meant they had to print even more to buy the same amount of supplies. By 1778 the total currency in circulation surpassed $60 million. The value plummeted, the exchange rate went from 1:1 to 3:1 to 6:1 against silver. Soldiers' wages were worthless. The government's response: more printing. $63 million was printed in 1778 alone. By 1779 the velocity of the collapse was staggering. By late 1779 it took 45 Continentals to buy one silver dollar, down from 1:1 in just 4 years. Not worth a Continental became the common phrase. People used the paper to light their pipes. They plastered it onto walls as wallpaper. A dog smeared in tar and covered in Continental bills was paraded through the streets of Philadelphia. This wasn't just an economic issue. It was a crisis of confidence. Many questioned the future of the revolution itself. Could a government that couldn't manage its money truly govern? States like Virginia also issued their own paper money, adding to the chaos. This fragmented currency system made interstate commerce nearly impossible. Merchants often preferred British pounds to American paper. The social fabric itself was tearing. In October 1779, the Fort Wilson riot broke out in Philadelphia. An armed mob composed of militiamen, angry about inflation, marched on the home of James Wilson, a wealthy merchant they accused of hoarding. A firefight broke out. Men were killed. This was Americans fighting Americans over the ruins of their money. And then everything changed with foreign loans. Benjamin Franklin, now in Paris, worked a diplomatic miracle. He secured loans from France. France, a key ally, began providing substantial financial aid. Spain and the Netherlands also offered support. These loans often came in hard currency, gold and silver. This specie helped stabilize the American financial situation slightly. It gave the army a way to buy supplies without printing. But the currency was already dead. Victory came despite the Continental, not because of it. By 1779, Congress had printed over $200 million. The Continental dollar was now worth just 2 cents on the silver dollar. Imagine your entire life savings evaporating by 98%. The soldiers who had fought the entire war paid in Continentals had essentially been paid nothing. Their back pay was a stack of worthless paper. This led to widespread desertions and mutinies. In 1780, the currency was virtually and officially worthless. Congress attempted a radical solution. It was, in effect, a default. On March 18, 1780, Congress passed an act. They recalled the old Continentals at a rate of 4.01, meaning your $40 in paper was now worth just $1 in new interest-bearing bills. In practice, holders took approximately 975% haircut, a coercive restructuring. If that moment floored you smash like so, this history doesn't get memory hold. Who was hurt the most? The soldiers, the small farmers, the original patriots who had accepted the currency in 1775 out of faith. Who benefited? Speculators who had bought up millions in Continentals for pennies on the dollar, and now held a claim on the new government. Many citizens lost everything. The faith in government-issued paper money was shattered for a generation. The experience had profound implications for the new nation. It cemented a deep visceral distrust of fiat currency. The trauma of this collapse burned into the minds of the founders when they gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 to write a new constitution. The ghost of the Continental dollar was in the room. Men like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton argued passionately for sound money. They had witnessed firsthand how paper money destroys trust. This wasn't theory to them, but it was trauma. They had seen an army starve. They had seen riots in the streets. They had seen their government's promises turn to dust. They wrote the Constitution specifically to prevent the new federal government from repeating this exact mistake. They debated it fiercely, a proposal to give the new Congress the power to emit bills of credit. The exact phrase used in 1775 was put to a vote. It was overwhelmingly defeated. The founders voted 9 states 2-2 to strip that power from the Constitution. The debate over paper money was fierce. The convention constrained federal emission while enabling coinage, and borrowing later practice evolved via statute and court decisions. Instead, they gave Congress Article I, Section 8, the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States, coin or borrow, not print. Crucially, they went further. Article I, Section 10, was a direct slap at the states. No state shall coin money, amid bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. This omission, this rejection of paper money was deliberate. The specter of the Continental Dollar haunted economic policy for decades. The power to tax a unified nation and a functioning economy. The Continental Dollar saga is America's first encounter with hyperinflation. It was a painful, searing lesson in fiscal responsibility. It showed the dangers of printing money without a strong economy or tax base. It proved that a currency is only as strong as the faith in the government that issues it, and it highlighted the human cost of economic instability. Ordinary citizens bore the brunt of the government's desperate measures, which brings us back to today. Governments worldwide grapple with inflation. Central banks print vast sums during crises. You might think we've learned that our modern policies are more sophisticated, but here's the uncomfortable truth. In 1775, Congress faced a choice: stop printing and lose the war, or keep printing and destroy the currency. Today, policymakers often face the same choice: stop printing and face a recession, or keep printing and destroy savings. Since 2020, major central banks have expanded their balance sheets by roughly $6 trillion plus, and every single time they choose to print. Before the final warning, here's how you can read the signals. Signal number 1. Real interest rates. The policy rate minus inflation are negative. Signal number 2. The supply of broad money is growing much faster than the real output of the economy. Signal #3. Governments start talking about price controls or capital frictions. Here's a 3-step plan to think about this. Is educational, not advice. 1. Hold a 3 to 6 month cash buffer that actually earns interest. 2. Reduce your exposure to floating rate debt where possible. 3. Own a mix of scarce and productive assets. That's why the ghost of the Continental Dollar isn't just history, it's a warning we keep ignoring. Comment checklist below and I'll pin a comment with the one-page paper confidence dashboard breaking down these signals. And if this history was valuable, subscribe for the follow-up.